Welcome, everyone. My name is Ryan Susky, and I'm the Director of Programs at the Ohio Center for Law-Related Education, and I'll be your facilitator for today's Unit 4 hearing of the We the People National Invitational with Fishers Junior High. In a moment, I'm going to have the judges introduce themselves, followed by the students, and then we'll begin the hearing. The process, of course, is students will deliver a 4-minute prepared statement, followed by 8 minutes of judge questions. Now, my microphone is going to be muted during the hearing, but I will be holding up the time and 1-minute signs. So I do highly recommend that you put your computer on gallery view instead of speaker view so that you'll see my time cards show up. At the conclusion of the hearing, judges will give brief feedback to the teams, and then we will conclude. Now I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to your chairperson for today to begin the introductions.
Okay, well, thank you, Ryan, and hello, Fishers. Good to see you. As Ryan said, we'll introduce ourselves, have you introduce yourself and your teacher, and then turn to the business at hand. My name is Joe Stewart. I teach in the political science department at Clemson University in South Carolina. Do this every year, always enjoy seeing the people from Fishers and look forward to learning from you about what you've been studying with the Constitution. Relax, we're going to have fun today. My colleagues will introduce
I guess it's me.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. It's Diana Owen. I'm a professor of political science at Georgetown University, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Hello, I'm Deshawn Whitaker, a We the People teacher in Charles County Public Schools in Maryland.
Please introduce yourselves and your teacher.
Hi, I'm Tanvi Pathuri, the captain of Unit 4, and we're from Fishers Junior High in Fishers, Indiana.
Hi, I'm Jenna Talbot.
Hi, I'm Sloan Bass.
Hi, I'm Claire Eby, and our instructors are Mike Fosselt and Tony Sturgeon.
Okay, great. We are covering question 1 today, so I will read that question for you. An American historian claims that the ratification debates were one of the greatest and most probing public debates in American history. Do you agree or disagree? Why? What evidence can you offer to support your response? Evaluate the major arguments the Federalists advanced in support of the ratification of the Constitution. Evaluate the major arguments the Anti-Federalists put forth in opposition to ratification of the Constitution. Why did a Bill of Rights become a focal point for both the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists? You may begin.
The arguments made in the ratification debates are still prevalent in the debates we have today, proving, centuries later, these are still some of the greatest debates in American history. The shift from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution wasn't a faultless one. The fixing of the problems of the Articles of Confederation required a series of lengthy debates, both during and after the Philadelphia Convention. At the center of these debates, Anti-Federalists and Federalists argued over the core ideas of the new Constitution and their role in our republic. The Federalists believed our nation needed a powerful federal government, unlike the government proposed by the Articles of Confederation. A strong central government was stressed by the Federalists as their want for a union spread across states. During the ratification debates in New York, the Federalist minority expressed their desire for a union. New Jersey also saw the advantage in having a centralized government, as a new constitution would preserve the state's stature in a union, as well as provide benefits such as militia protection and equal representation under the Senate.
Federalists also pushed to add support to the weakest parts of our government through the Constitution. Under the Articles of Confederation, the one-house legislature had no executive and was unable to raise funds. The system was seen as ineffective. To combat this, Federalists pushed for a more representative government by creating a two-house or bicameral legislature with equal representation in the Senate, meant to balance power between the small and big states. On the anti-federalist side, they wanted to keep the confederal system with the weaker federal government and the stronger sovereign states. The anti-federalists argued the new constitution would make the central government all-powerful and lead to a unitary system, the very thing they were fleeing from the British government. Throughout these debates, Virginia, New York, and Massachusetts vocalized their yearning to keep the Articles, and reject the proposed Constitution.
Virginia wanted slaves to be counted as full persons so they could have more representation in the House and Senate, which at the time had its representatives chosen by the states. Many Federalists did not approve of this idea and instead suggested counting enslaved people as 3/5 of a person. The Anti-Federalists disagreed by stating in Brutus III that if slaves are considered as property and not free agents, they should not be counted at all. Massachusetts was also in heavy opposition to the Constitution. The western counties that were the center of Shays' Rebellion saw the new Constitution as too similar to the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780, which gave too much power to the wealthy East. Anti-Federalists in the state altogether feared an overly centralized government that would ignore individual rights. The New York Anti-Federalist majority expressed its support in rejecting the Constitution.
The state detested the taxation proposed by the Constitution and felt a federal defense was not necessary. The Bill of Rights was a second key divide. The Anti-Federalists were in support of the Bill of Rights in order to limit the federal government's power and to reserve power to the states. The Federalists worked to defend the weakest points of the Constitution, such as a lack of a Bill of Individual Rights, by stating current protections were adequate and that Congress had the power to propose amendments when seen as necessary, as stated in Article 5. Hamilton disliked the Bill of Rights because he thought it would lead the people to believe those were the only rights ensured. Federalists also made the argument that the Bill of Rights would not be needed in the newly revised Constitution because the people and the states kept any power not delegated to the federal government, which is emphasized in the 10th Amendment today. The inclusion of the Bill of Rights does not change the fundamental characteristics of the federal government. Furthermore, it is clear the ratification debates consequently mold the Constitution and republic we have today. We finished our testimony and are now ready for your follow-up questions.
Thank you. You mentioned that the debates that went on between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists are still relevant today, and that the Constitution tried to fix problems in the Articles. What problems in the Articles do we see continuing to manifest themselves today, a couple hundred years later? Are we seeing the same kind? What, I guess another way of stating that, what are the continuing debates that started then that we continue to have today?
Well, one of the Anti-Federalists' biggest debate points was the lack of individual rights and that's why they felt the Bill of Rights was necessary. And we still see this today with things like the First Amendment, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, also in the Second Amendment with things like the right to bear arms when it comes to things like gun control.
And one big problem in the Articles of Confederation was that it required a unanimous vote. And we can kind of see that problem still rise in our Constitution, and that our Congress doesn't, because it's political parties, they don't tend to compromise on things, making the unanimous vote or the failure to have all people agree on something difficult now today.
And we can see now it's still being debated how much power the federal government should have compared to the states. And with stick and carrot methods, you could see this with the federal government, the federal government and the state governments, because a debate that's really prevalent to us as students is education, and we're required to take standardized testing, which is the stick and carrot method by the federal government.
Building off of what Sloan said, you can argue that people still think that the states should have a little bit more power, because one of the major arguments of the Anti-Federalists was that they didn't want an overarching federal government that would ignore individual rights, as Claire stated as well.
So I'd also like to piggyback off of your initial statement about the debate still being relevant today and ask you a hypothetical. Do you still think that we need the Bill of Rights today? If you were part of the Constitutional Convention that was being held today, would you argue for or against the Bill of Rights?
I would argue for a Bill of Rights because I can see where the Anti-Federalists were coming from, because we just came from Britain where they had a tyrannical leader. So they were scared that their individual rights would be infringed upon with an overarching federal government.
I would also argue for a Bill of Rights because I think it's important that individuals should have rights. And with a John Locke perspective, the individuals are only supposed to get the absolute necessary of rights, and the federal government is there to protect the people.
And while I agree with Jenna and Son, we could take the opposite side that if we did have another Bill of Rights today, would those be the only rights ensured as Alexander Hamilton feared?
Also, along with the 14th Amendment, the Bill of Rights then applied to states, and it gives those states the same powers.
Thank you for saying your thoughts. So let's talk about, we've talked about individual rights. How do you think they would feel today about the national government's power versus state power? Do you feel that the national government has too much power over the states, or are we balanced, or what are your thoughts?
I mean, to start off, I think the Anti-Federalists would absolutely hate the stick and carrot methods we have now, where the federal government is encroaching on all state powers, which was a big fear of the Anti-Federalists.
But you can also see in the Constitution, Article 6, the federal government is supposed to be the supreme law of the land.
I would definitely argue that the federal government has more power, and we can see this with judicial review, where the Supreme Court is able to, what some would call legislating from the bench, and affect policy outcomes by ruling on if things are constitutional or unconstitutional.
You talk about the carrot and stick approach by which the federal government exercises power. Why not just have states refuse the carrots? A certain number of states have done that, for instance, with the extending the Affordable Care Act. So is that the national government exercising power, or states being willing to be bribed? Let me use a
Well, we can see in McCulloch v. Maryland that established that the federal government has financial power over the states. And so if states want money and funding for certain things, they kind of have to take that carrot, or what basically the catch of the argument, to receive that funding.
And in South Dakota v. Doyle, it did say that it's a form of coercion for the national government to say they would take away money. But in my opinion, I believe it's the same sort of coercion to say we will give you money if you do what we want.
And also Article 6 says that federal law is the supreme law of the land. So if the states were to refuse that, then they wouldn't get anything. They'd just be left. So they have to take that, or else they have no other option because of the supreme law of the land.
Also, it could cause the states, if we continue to ignore the federal government, to break apart, ultimately leading to separate countries and war upon each other.
So you mentioned in your opening statement, Shays' Rebellion. Could you elaborate a little bit more about what Shays' Rebellion was and its relevance to the debates over the Constitution?
Well, in Massachusetts, it had a very heavy opposition to the Constitution and a very large anti-federalist majority. And that was because the anti-federalists feared an overarching power that would unfairly tax them, because that was what sparked Shays' Rebellion. And Massachusetts did not fully recover from that. So they were worried that if the federal government had the power to unfairly tax them, then more rebellions would spark and more states would be not sovereign.
And even to build on that, if some of the other Federalist arguments were that if the Articles of Confederation couldn't control this group of farmers that were revolting taxes, how could they control such a big country without a central leadership?
Also, Shays' Rebellion revealed one of the anti-federalist biggest fears, which was taxation, especially in states like Massachusetts, New York, and Virginia, where they made a lot of the country's money through things like production of farming, ports, and our federal money.
And you can see with states such as New York, they're not going to want to give up their sovereignty, because New York at the time controlled most of the federal banking, and they weren't going to want to deal with taxation.
All right, and we may be able to get in my last question. We'll see. You mentioned, oh gosh, where was I? You mentioned I lost my thought. I'm sorry. So if another judge have a question, go ahead.
Yeah, well, you talk about the anti-federalists being afraid of government power. A lot of times when we were talking about defending rights, it's because of
Time.
and I'll never get to know the answer to that. Thank you. Good job. Yeah, I very much enjoyed our discussion. I like the way that you talked about how the debates that we had back then were still relevant today. Where I was going to go, and I think you would have been able to deal with this. What's interesting now is that a lot of the allegations of limitations of rights that we have. You mentioned First Amendment. The Supreme Court just heard a case this week where the First Amendment is the issue, but it's not the national government that's attempting to limit speech. It is a local government, in this case, a school board. So we've got a kind of an interesting situation. Once the court extended the Bill of Rights, or most of the Bill of Rights, to the states, that's where a lot of the conflicts have come in. And that's probably, I think the Anti-Federalists saw the states as the guarantors of rights, and that's where people would have the greatest impact. One of the reasons I wanted to follow up on the carrot and stick approach is because it is interesting, and people are quite willing to make choices. And I teach in South Carolina right now, where in 1 week, when Nikki Haley was our governor, she pointed out that we would not expand Medicaid eligibility because this was the evil federal government into imposing itself on us. The next week, she held a news conference to announce that we had gotten a big grant for federal highway funds to redo I-85 through South Carolina. So either the federal government became less equal or less evil in a week, or we want that money. We don't want the other money. As a colleague of mine said, well, Joe, different people get that money. So these kinds of things are important. But the good news is I was very pleased with your discussion of these issues, and I'm confident that you could wrestle with those, and you're well equipped to be good, productive citizens as we go forward. So congratulations on, again, doing a very good job representing Fishers.
I agree with my colleague. I thought that you did a really wonderful job, both with your prepared remarks and in your responses to the question. I also like the idea that you started out, you kind of gave us an opening to ask some interesting questions when you said, these debates are still relevant today. And then you answered the question, or you kind of answered the main question by doing a great job of talking about the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, and all the issues that, or a lot of the issues that they dealt with. One of the things that really impressed me about this team is that you have a good knowledge of the history, even being able to drill down to specific states and use those, kind of examples of what was going on in the particular states to make your case. And that provided a richness to your answers that I think was really smart and impressive. I also like the fact you were bringing in philosophers like John Locke, and that you raised also Supreme Court cases in relation to concepts like judicial review. And so I thought overall a really, really strong performance. I also, in terms of the teamwork, you all seem to work really well together. You sometimes agreed, but other times you respectfully disagreed, which is good because we got a variety of perspective through your answers. So I just have to say that, you know, you did a really, really great job and a very strong performance. And thank you to your teachers for preparing you so well and taking you to the National Invitational.
Yes, and I agree with what everyone said. I enjoyed speaking with you today. I wish we had more time to discuss some of your thoughts. The complexity of the question, as well as the depth of your knowledge, was spot on. And I just needed to hear more from you. And I just appreciated everything that you said today. Very good job.
Okay.
Very
Thank
nicely
Judges,
done.
we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very
you.
much.
Good to see you.